Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into a project that's causing quite a stir in London.
Oh yeah, this one's a big one.
It's the redevelopment of 72 Upper Ground on the South Bank.
Right on the Thames there.
Yeah, so this is something that I think is going to be really interesting to all of our listeners because it involves transforming this really prominent spot, right?
Yeah.
With plans for new offices, cultural spaces.
A rooftop restaurant even?
Yeah, panoramic views, the whole shebang. But of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. There's some pushback too.
Yeah, definitely some concerns.
Like concerns about the size of the building. Will it clash with the skyline?
And then there's the housing question.
Affordable housing.
Right.
Huge issue.
Always a hot topic in London.
Yeah.
And then, we're in this post-pandemic world, so some people are even wondering, do we even need more office space?
Yeah. Is that really what we need right now?
So we've got tons of sources to get through, architectural plans, community feedback reports, even articles about, all the political back and forth. It's gotten pretty heated.
Yeah, it's a juicy one. So are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So to kick things off, I think it's important to understand the two sides of this story.
Right. Yeah, you've got the developer's vision, which is pretty ambitious.
Grand, even.
Yeah, they want to turn 72 Upper Ground into this world-class workplace. It attract all the big names in those creative and tech industries.
Silicon Valley on the Thames.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're also promising new arts and cultural venues, but with a focus on affordability and public access, which is a good thing.
Yeah, trying to appease the community a little bit there.
Right. And of course, they're emphasizing the economic benefits, job creation, all that. Which makes sense because, the previous occupants, ITV, they moved their headquarters out, so there's a bit of a void to fill.
Yeah, those iconic ITV studios. I remember seeing them all lit up at night.
Yeah. It's definitely quieter around there now.
But they do have this program called Preview going on right now. It's kind of a stopgap measure.
Yeah, they're supporting some local creative organizations, kind of a bridge between the old and the new.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. While the developers are all about progress and innovation, some residents are pushing back. Hard. They're saying this new building's going to be a monstrosity.
Yeah, a monstrosity, that's what they're calling it.
Blocking views, overshadowing the South Bank's charm.
Right, there's this real concern about how it'll affect the skyline. And people are worried about losing daylight, too, especially those enjoying the Riverside Walk.
Yeah. And even though the developers are talking about all these new jobs, a lot of residents are like, hold on, what we really need is more housing.
Especially affordable options.
Right. Not just more offices and shops.
Yeah. They feel like that's not really addressing the community's needs.
Exactly. And then there's that question that keeps coming up. Do we even need all this office space anymore?
With so many people working remotely now.
It's a valid point. It seems like what the community really wants is, yeah, arts and culture, but also green spaces and just a sense of balance,
Yeah, they don't want to lose what makes the South Bank special.
Exactly. So how do you reconcile those two things?
That's the million-pound question, right?
Million-pound question. But before we get too lost in the weeds of that debate, let's look at the actual design because it is pretty unique.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really interesting.
They're talking about using tree columns. Not only do they look cool, but they're also supposed to be good for the environment.
Yeah, they're really pushing the sustainability angle with this one.
Yeah, they claim these tree columns are going to reduce the building's carbon footprint.
They're saying something like 19% less embodied carbon compared to a typical design.
Wow, that's a pretty significant chunk.
Yeah, and they're also good for creating these big open-plan office spaces, which are all the rage these days.
Yeah, everyone wants that Google-esque vibe.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the Sky Pod. That's the rooftop restaurant and terrace.
Oh, yeah. Imagine having dinner there. Panoramic views of the city.
Definitely Instagram worthy.
Totally. And then, tucked away inside the building, you've got this sunken garden.
And another one on the podium level. Kind of like a little oasis in the middle of all the hustle and bustle.
Yeah, creating a sense of calm amidst the chaos.
And all these design choices, they're not just random. They're part of this bigger trend of focusing on occupant well-being.
Yeah, making sure people actually enjoy being in the office.
Right. They want to create this healthy, productive work environment. So they're including things like openable windows, high ceilings, and of course, access to all those outdoor spaces.
Yeah, got to get that fresh air. And on top of all that, they're aiming for a net zero carbon operation.
Yeah, all electric systems, natural ventilation, the whole 9 yards.
Pretty ambitious.
It is. And they're also trying to make sure the building feels like a natural part of the South Bank, not just plonked down in the middle of it.
Right. They're proposing new pedestrian routes, improvements to the public spaces around the building.
You want it to feel integrated, not like some isolated island.
Yeah. Which makes sense, especially considering that the South Bank is a designated conservation area.
Right. The planning framework for this area is actually quite complex. You've got the Central Activities Zone, which encourages development and economic growth.
Yeah, build, build, build.
Then there's the Waterloo Opportunity Area, which specifically promotes tall buildings.
So they're kind of contradicting each other there.
A little bit,
Yeah.
but then you also have the South Bank Conservation Area, which is all about preserving the character and heritage of the area.
So how do you reconcile all of those competing priorities?
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
And it's definitely generating a lot of debate
Right.
because some people see this development as progress, they see economic vitality, but others are worried that it's going to change the South Bank forever,
It's like a shadow hanging over this beloved public space.
both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the community's concerns, I think it's worth taking a closer look at the planned cultural offerings because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Okay, so one of the key elements is this dedicated space called the London Studios, which is aimed at supporting those emerging creative industries.
So kind of like a incubator.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be offering affordable workspaces, studios, areas for events, and they're really emphasizing public access, trying to make it feel like it's for everyone.
Right, because that's one of the big criticisms, right, that these new developments often end up catering only to the wealthy.
Exactly. So they're trying to address that head on. But even with all these promises, there's still a lot of skepticism from the community.
Yeah, people are wondering, will these spaces really be accessible?
And will they actually serve the needs of the local community?
Right, not just some shiny facade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because people have very specific ideas about what they want to see.
Yeah, they're not just passively accepting whatever the developers throw at them.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So they're asking for things like digital art studios, outdoor screenings, and a regular program of events that actually appeal to them.
So the developers have their work cut out for them.
They do. It's a high bar to meet.
It is. But let's get into some specifics. What exactly are they proposing?
Okay, so one of the highlights is the assembly room, which is this double-height space. They're saying it'll be perfect for performances and exhibitions.
Sounds impressive.
And then there's this grand staircase that leads down to the lower ground floor studios.
Oh, wow.
And the idea is that visitors can actually watch the creative process in action.
That's pretty cool. So they're really trying to create a dynamic cultural hub.
Yeah, they want to make it a destination, not just an afterthought.
But let's not forget about that shadow we talked about earlier. It's not just a metaphor.
Right, the building's height and massing are a huge point of contention.
People are really worried about it blocking views and overshadowing the surrounding buildings.
And, you have to remember that this site was previously approved for a 31-story tower by ITV.
Oh, wow. So this is actually smaller.
Yeah. The current proposal is actually lower at the riverfront, but it still has this stepped form with taller elements set back. So it's still a pretty substantial structure.
And people are worried about how it's going to affect the overall feel of the South Bank.
Exactly. So it's this tension between the need for development and the desire to preserve what makes the South Bank unique.
How do we even begin to navigate that?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we're going to keep grappling with as we continue our deep dive today. It really is. It's a
Yeah.
tough one. And what's interesting is that even those who are, generally supportive of the project,
In principle.
yeah, even they have some reservations about the scale. It just, there's this feeling that the South Bank is at a bit of a crossroads.
A turning point.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to hold on to its heritage as a cultural hub, but also facing all these pressures of, modern development.
Right. How do you evolve without losing what makes it special?
Exactly. And it's not just about the buildings themselves, it's about the people, too.
Yeah.
Like, think about the impact of potentially adding 5,000 more workers to the area.
Plus all the visitors to the cultural spaces and the shops.
Right. It's a lot of people.
It really is. And how is that going to affect the people who actually live there?
Yeah, the people who call the South Bank home.
Yeah.
How is their daily life going to change? Like a question we're seeing play out in cities all over the world, really.
Yeah, it's that classic tension between accommodating growth and preserving what makes a place unique,
Yeah.
and livable.
Exactly. That balance is so hard to find.
It is, but to be fair to the developers, they're not completely ignoring these concerns. They're really pushing the sustainability angle with this project.
Yeah, they're aiming for that net zero carbon operation we talked about. And they're even doing things like incorporating nesting boxes for birds
for black redstarts
Yeah.
and perches for peregrine falcons.
Yeah, they're trying to, be mindful of the local ecosystem.
Mhm.
And their plans for the public some are actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, I was looking at the renderings, and it does look quite nice.
Yeah, they're creating these new pedestrian walkways, opening up sight lines to the river, lots of greenery.
I really liked that detail about removing the railings along the northern boundary, so it connects the retail terraces with the lawn and the trees along Queen's Walk.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
And those curved seating steps leading up to Queen's Walk.
They're really trying to encourage people to linger.
Yeah, enjoy the space. It's all very nature all around, which is the phrase they're using.
Isn't that the idea?
It is. But the question is it enough to win over the skeptics? Because that shadow of the 31-story tower is still looming.
It's hard to forget about that.
And a lot of people are still worried that the South Bank is going to become dominated by office space. So where does that leave us? What does successful urban development even look like in this context?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is, because who gets to decide? Is it purely about the economics, job creation, investment, all that?
Or is it about something more than that?
Yeah, like community well-being, sustainability, preserving the character of a place. How do you measure those things?
Exactly. They're not so easily quantifiable.
They're not, but they're important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So going back to those community concerns we touched on earlier, we talked about overshadowing, loss of daylight. But what about the demand for office space itself?
Yeah.
Some people are saying it just doesn't make sense in a world where so many people are working remotely now.
Yeah, it's a valid point.
The developers are pushing back on that, though.
Yeah.
They're citing all this research that shows there's still a strong demand for high-quality office space.
But high quality being the operative phrase there.
Exactly. They're saying people still want that face-to-face interaction, that creative energy you get from a shared workspace.
Right. But it has to be, the right kind of space.
Exactly. It can't just be any old office. It has to be somewhere people actually want to be.
With all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, all the amenities.
The rooftop gardens, the gyms, the kombucha on tap.
Exactly. Yeah. But the problem is that kind of space comes at a premium. And that's what worries people. They're worried that it's going to push out the smaller businesses, the more affordable options.
And that the South Bank is going to become this, playground for the wealthy.
Yeah. And then what happens to the longtime residents? The community organizations that give the area its character.
It's a valid concern.
It is. And that's where the provision of affordable workspaces within the London studios becomes really important.
Right. So they're trying to create some balance there.
Yeah. They're promising at least 10% affordable space, which is in line with Lambeth's local plan. But the question is that enough?
And even if they do create these spaces, are they actually going to be accessible to the people who need them most? The grassroots organizations, the emerging artists.
That's a key question.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's the point of having all these shiny new facilities if they're priced out of reach for the people they're supposed to be helping?
Exactly. It defeats the purpose. And it brings us back to that question of, who gets to define success when it comes to urban development?
Because the economic benefits are often very clear.
Yeah.
But what about the social and cultural impacts? Are they being given enough consideration?
Were they being measured?
Exactly. Because those things are harder to quantify.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're not important.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we all need to be thinking about, not just in the context of this development, but in the context of how our cities are evolving in general.
Yeah, it's a global conversation.
It is. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to come back to that image of the South Bank being at a crossroads.
Okay.
What do you think is at stake here? What could be lost if this development goes ahead as planned?
I think what's at stake is the soul of the South Bank. That sense of community, that vibrant mix of uses, that accessible public realm that makes it such a special place.
Right, because it could end up becoming just another generic corporate space.
Yeah, indistinguishable from any other city center in the world. And that would be a real shame.
It would. But the good news is, it's not a done deal yet.
No. The community is engaged, they're voicing their concerns, and it seems like the developers are at least listening to some extent.
So there's still hope.
I think so. I think there's still an opportunity for dialogue, for compromise, for finding solutions that balance economic growth with preserving what makes the South Bank unique.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? What can they do?
I think it means that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of our cities. It means asking ourselves what we value most about the places we live, work, and play.
And then speaking up for those values.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, to demand better, to imagine a future where urban development is truly sustainable and equitable and enriching for everyone.
Well said. And if you are feeling inspired by what we've been talking about today, I encourage you to go visit the South Bank. Experience it for yourself.
Yeah, go see the changes that are happening.
Talk to the people who live and work there.
And think about what kind of future you want to see for this iconic part of London.
So we've talked a lot about the developer's vision, but let's get into those community feedback reports.
Yeah, those are really interesting.
Because it's clear that residents aren't just, saying no to everything.
No, they're really engaged.
They're invested. They want to shape the future of their neighborhood.
And they've put a lot of thought into their suggestions.
Yeah, they're not just like, no, don't build anything.
Exactly. Like, take their feedback on the cultural offerings. They're really looking for things that are interactive and engaging.
Yeah, they want experiences, not just, things to look at.
Exactly. So they're excited about those digital art studios, workshops where they can learn new skills, spaces that showcase work from local artists.
Yeah, things that bring the community together.
Exactly. And there's this real emphasis on making sure those spaces are accessible to everyone.
Yeah, inclusivity is huge.
It is, regardless of age, background, ability.
Right, everyone should be able to participate.
And that community-minded approach extends beyond the cultural stuff, too. Like
Right.
their feedback on the public realm.
Oh, yeah, what did they have to say about that?
Well, they definitely want more green spaces.
But not just, boring old lawns.
No, they want areas where nature can really thrive. Like, I saw this one suggestion for a pocket forest.
A pocket forest.
Yeah, imagine that. Tucked away somewhere on the site. A little oasis of biodiversity right in the middle of the city.
That's a really cool idea.
It is. And they have all these amazing ideas for activating the public realm, too.
Yeah.
Like outdoor screenings, farmers markets, even a community garden.
Wow, so they're really thinking outside the box.
They are. They want a South Bank that's even more vibrant and welcoming than it already is.
It's inspiring.
It is. But, at the end of the day, developers are businesses.
Yeah, they're not charities.
Exactly. They have to make a profit.
So how realistic is it to expect them to incorporate all this feedback? I mean, some of these things sound pretty expensive.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that sweet spot between what the community wants and what's actually financially viable. It's not always easy.
No, it's a tough balancing act. So what can we, the average citizens, do? How can we make sure our voices are heard?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and engaged.
Right, so go to those public meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't just sit back and complain. Go and make your voice heard.
Submit your feedback.
Support those community organizations that are fighting for your interests. And remember, it's not just about opposing the things you don't want.
It's about being proactive.
Yeah, about championing the kind of development that reflects your values.
Right. Be the change you want to see.
Exactly. And never underestimate the power of collective action. When a community comes together and speaks with a unified voice,
People listen.
they do. You can actually make a difference.
That's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. It's about taking action and making your voice heard.
So this whole 72 upper ground redevelopment,
It's a microcosm, really,
yeah, it's one example of these bigger urban planning challenges.
that we're seeing all over the world.
Exactly. And it reminds us that the future of our cities isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make.
And the actions we take.
So if you're feeling inspired by what we've been talking about today, I encourage you to go visit the South Bank.
Yeah, walk around, see what's happening.
Talk to the people who live and work there. Observe the changes that are taking place.
And think about what you want the future of this place to look like.
Yeah, because the questions we've explored today, they go way beyond this one development. They're about how we define success in urban development, how we balance economic growth with the well-being of our communities.
And how we make sure our cities are vibrant and inclusive and sustainable for generations to come.
Well said. That's it for our deep dive into the 72 upper ground redevelopment. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.